The day I found out my parents had given my dream house to my sister, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even argue. I simply stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the keys my mother had placed in my sister's hand, while my father smiled as if he had just done something wonderful. Then my sister looked at me and said 6 words that I will never forget. "I guess Mom and Dad chose me." She smiled. My parents smiled. And I walked out of the house I had spent years dreaming about. I thought that was the end of my family. I had no idea that 48 hours later, a lawyer would call me and say, "Emily, please don't sign anything your parents give you. There's something about that house you don't know." My name is Emily Carter, and what happened next changed the way I understood my entire family. Before I tell you everything, if you enjoy emotional family stories about betrayal, secrets, unexpected twists, and people finally discovering the truth, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue bringing you stories like this. Now let me take you back to where everything started. I was 34 years old when I first saw the house. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't one of those enormous American homes with 10 bedrooms, a swimming pool, and a driveway that looked like a private road. It was simply beautiful. A 2-story white house sitting at the end of a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio. There were tall trees in the front yard, a small porch, and 3 large windows overlooking the backyard. But the thing that made me fall in love with it wasn't the outside. It was the kitchen. The kitchen had a huge window above the sink. Every morning, sunlight came through that window and filled the room. I remember standing there during the open house and imagining myself making coffee on a Sunday morning. I imagined having Thanksgiving dinner there. I imagined my future children running through the hallway. I imagined my parents sitting on the porch when they were older. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at a house. I was looking at a future. But there was one problem. I couldn't afford it. At least not yet. The house was listed for $485,000. I had saved nearly $70,000 for a down payment, but I still needed several months to make everything work. So I did something I had always done. I worked harder. I took extra shifts. I stopped eating out. I canceled vacations. I sold things I didn't need. For nearly 2 years, that house remained in the back of my mind. Then, finally, I had enough. I called the realtor. The house was still available. I couldn't believe it. I put in an offer. And 3 weeks later, I signed the closing documents. The house was officially mine. I remember walking inside that first evening with a cardboard box in my arms. There was no furniture, no decorations, no expensive paintings, just empty rooms and echoes. But I was happier than I had ever been. I put my box on the kitchen floor, sat down beside it, and cried. Not because I was sad, because I had finally done something for myself. For years, I had felt like the responsible daughter. The daughter who helped, the daughter who stayed, the daughter who solved problems. And now I finally had something that belonged completely to me, or at least I thought I did. My younger sister, Madison, had always been different from me. She was 29, beautiful, outgoing, and extremely confident. Where I was careful, Madison was impulsive. Where I saved money, Madison spent it. Where I planned for the future, Madison lived for the moment. And somehow, despite all those differences, my parents always seemed to understand her more than they understood me. When Madison wanted a new car, Dad helped her with the down payment. When she changed jobs 3 times in 1 year, Mom told everyone she was finding herself. When she got into credit card debt, my parents paid it off. When she broke up with her boyfriend, my mother stayed at her apartment for 2 weeks. Nobody ever asked me if I needed help, because everyone knew Emily could handle herself. And honestly, I had stopped complaining about it. I loved my parents. I loved Madison. I just accepted that our family worked that way. Then Madison visited my new house. She walked through every room. She opened every cabinet. She looked at the backyard. Then she stood in the kitchen and said, "This is gorgeous." I smiled. "I know." She looked at me. "You actually got it?" I laughed. "Yes." She hugged me. "I'm so happy for you." At the time, I believed her. A month later, Madison started asking strange questions. How much is your mortgage? How much did you put down? Are you planning to stay here forever? I didn't think much of it. Then one evening, my mother called me. She said, Emily, your father and I need to talk to you. I asked what was wrong. She said, nothing is wrong. We just want you to come over Sunday. So I went. When I arrived, Madison was already there. My father was sitting at the dining table. My mother was holding a folder. And the moment I saw that folder, something inside me tightened. I sat down. Dad cleared his throat. Emily, we've been thinking about the future. I looked at Madison. She wouldn't look at me. Then Mom said, we've decided that Madison should have the house. For several seconds, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. What house? Mom looked surprised. Your house. I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when your brain refuses to accept what you're hearing. Mom, that's not possible. Dad leaned forward. Emily, listen to us. No, I looked at them. It's my house. Dad sighed. We know. Then what are you talking about? Mom opened the folder. We've arranged for Madison to take ownership. My heart started pounding. Take ownership? Yes. I looked at Madison. She finally raised her eyes. And she said, it's not like you're losing everything. I stared at her. What does that mean? She shrugged. You can buy another house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to give you my house? She corrected me. Mom and Dad are giving it to me. I looked at my father. How? He said, we've made arrangements. I stood up. No, absolutely not. My mother began crying. Emily, please don't make this ugly. That sentence broke something inside me. I wasn't making anything ugly. They were. I had worked for that house. I had sacrificed for it. I had paid for it. And now they were sitting there telling me my sister deserved it more. I looked at Madison. She was holding the folder. Then she smiled. I guess Mom and Dad chose me. That was when I walked out. I spent the entire night sitting on my kitchen floor. The same kitchen I had once dreamed about. The same window. The same sunlight. But suddenly everything felt different. I kept asking myself one question. Why? Why would my parents do this? Why would they give my sister something I had spent years earning? The next morning, I called my father. He didn't answer. I called my mother. She said, we've already discussed this. I asked her how they could legally transfer my property. She became defensive. Your father has taken care of everything. That's not an answer. She hung up. I contacted my bank, then my mortgage company. Then I started going through my closing documents. Everything showed my name. I was still the owner, at least according to the paperwork I had. But then I noticed something. A document had been added to my online property records. I didn't recognize it. It was dated 6 months earlier. 6 months before my parents told me they were giving the house to Madison. I stared at the document for nearly an hour. Then my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. Hello. A man's voice said, is this Emily Carter? Yes. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm an attorney. I immediately became cautious. Why are you calling me? There was a pause. Then he said, I represent an estate planning firm that handled documents for your parents. My heart stopped. My parents? Yes. What does this have to do with me? He lowered his voice. Emily, I need you to listen carefully. I sat down. I'm listening. He said, the house your parents are trying to give your sister isn't actually the real issue. I frowned. What does that mean? He continued. There is a trust connected to that property. I didn't understand. What trust? The one your parents created years ago. My hands became cold. Years ago? Yes. Why didn't anyone tell me? He paused. That's exactly why I'm calling you. Then he said something that completely changed everything. Your parents didn't buy that house for your sister. They bought it using money that legally belonged to you. I couldn't breathe. What? He repeated himself. Emily, according to the records I have, a substantial amount of money was placed into a family trust in your name when you were a child. I stared at the wall. What money? Your grandfather's estate. My grandfather had died when I was 8. I barely remembered anything about his finances. Daniel continued. Your grandfather left instructions. that the funds were to be held for you until you turned 35. I whispered, how much? There was another pause, then he gave me a number. $612,000. I nearly dropped the phone. That's impossible. It's documented, but I never received anything. I know. Where is it? Daniel said, that's the problem. I swallowed. Where is it? He replied, your parents used part of the trust to purchase your house. Everything suddenly became clear. The questions, the secret documents, the sudden decision to give Madison the house. My parents weren't simply favoring my sister. They were trying to move an asset that was connected to money that legally belonged to me. But Daniel wasn't finished. He said, there's one more thing. I asked, what? The trust becomes fully accessible to you when you turn 35. I looked at the calendar. My birthday was 3 weeks away, 3 weeks. Then he said, and Emily, there's a second property listed in the trust. I froze. Second property? Yes. Where? Daniel gave me an address. I knew it immediately. It was my parents' lake house. The vacation property I had always been told belonged to them. I whispered, they own that too. Daniel corrected me. Not exactly. The following morning, I met Daniel at his office. He placed a thick folder on the table. Before we continue, he said, I need you to understand something. I nodded. This isn't about revenge. I looked at him. It's about protecting your legal rights. He opened the folder. Inside were documents dating back more than 20 years. My grandfather's will, trust documents, bank records, property records, and something else. A letter. My grandfather had written it shortly before he died. Daniel handed it to me. My hands shook as I opened it. It said that he wanted his granddaughter Emily to have financial security because he believed she would someday become the person in the family who took responsibility for everyone else. I stopped reading. Tears filled my eyes because he had known me, even when I was 8 years old. He had known exactly what kind of person I would become. Daniel continued explaining. After my grandfather died, my parents became trustees. Their job was to manage the money for my benefit. But over the years, they moved portions of the money into different accounts. Then they purchased the house. The house I had believed I bought entirely with my own money. Daniel explained that some of my savings had paid the mortgage and closing costs, but a significant portion of the original down payment had come from the trust. I couldn't believe it. Why would they let me think I paid for it? Daniel looked at me. That's what we're trying to establish. Then he showed me another document. It was a transfer agreement. The plan was simple. Once the house was transferred to Madison, the connection to the trust would become much harder to trace. But there was one problem. They hadn't expected the original trust documents to surface. And Daniel had found them. I asked, why did you wait until now? He answered, because your grandfather's original attorney recently retired and his records were transferred to our firm. I looked down. So my parents thought they could get away with it. Possibly. I closed my eyes. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I was heartbroken because I suddenly understood something. My parents hadn't just betrayed me once. They had been making decisions about my future for decades. I decided not to tell my parents what I knew. Not yet. Instead, I went home. That evening, my mother called. Emily, we need you to sign the final transfer paperwork. I said, sure. She sounded relieved. Thank you. But I want everyone there. Everyone? You, Dad, Madison, and me? There was silence. Then she said, why? I think we should celebrate Madison getting the house. My mother agreed. 2 days later, they came to my house. Madison arrived first. She was smiling. She carried champagne. I almost laughed. My parents walked in behind her. Dad had a folder. Mom hugged me. Thank you for doing the right thing. I looked at her. What makes you think this is the right thing? She pulled away. Emily, I smiled. No, Mom, let's talk. I placed Daniel's folder on the table. My father's face changed instantly. Madison stopped smiling. I opened the first document. This is Grandpa's original trust. Nobody spoke. I placed the next document beside it. This is the bank account where the money was held. Then another. The transfer into the account used to purchase this house. My father stood up. Where did you get those? I looked directly at him. From your lawyer? My mother's face went pale. Madison looked at my father. Dad? He didn't answer. I turned toward Madison. Did you know? She shook her head. I swear I didn't. I believed her. For the first time that day, she looked scared. Then Dad said, Emily, you're misunderstanding the situation. I laughed softly. Am I? He said. We used the money for the family. The family? Yes. You used my trust fund. We invested it. You used it to buy property. It was an investment. And now you're giving that property to Madison. Dad became angry. Your sister needs it. I stared at him. More than I do? He said nothing. I turned to my mother. Did you know? She started crying. Emily, we were trying to help both of you. No. I shook my head. You were trying to help Madison. Then I said the sentence I had been waiting years to say. You always called me the strong daughter because it was easier than admitting you expected me to survive being treated unfairly. Nobody spoke. Madison began crying. Mom whispered, We love you. I answered, Love isn't supposed to require me to lose everything. Then Daniel walked into the house. My father looked shocked. What is he doing here? Daniel placed another document on the table. There is one final matter. Dad's face changed. Daniel looked at me. Emily, your grandfather included a condition in the trust that none of us noticed until the complete file was recovered. I asked, What condition? He opened the document. If the trustees misuse the funds, their authority is immediately terminated. My mother stopped crying. My father sat down. Daniel continued. That means your parents no longer have control over the remaining trust assets. I stared at him. How much is left? He answered. Approximately $1.1 million. I couldn't speak. My grandfather had left more than I ever knew. And because my parents had tried to transfer one property illegally, they had triggered the clause that protected me. Daniel then revealed the final secret. The lake house. The one I had been told belonged to my parents. It was also purchased through the trust. And there was one more property. A small commercial building in downtown Columbus. My grandfather had purchased it before his death. Its value had increased dramatically. Together, the assets connected to my trust were worth millions. I looked at my parents. They had spent years telling me there was nothing left. There had been. They simply hadn't wanted me to know. I expected Madison to be furious. Instead, she came to me privately. She sat across from me in the kitchen that had started this entire nightmare. She said, I didn't know. I nodded. I believe you. She started crying. I thought they were giving me the house because they loved me more. I looked at her. And now, she wiped her tears. Now I realized they were using me. That sentence hurt. Because I realized something too. Madison wasn't the person who had taken my house. My parents had created a situation where she believed she deserved something that was never truly hers. She apologized, not once, not casually. She apologized for every time she had accepted help without asking where it came from. Then she did something I never expected. She gave me the keys. I don't want it. I stared at them. She said, if this house belongs to you, I don't want to live here. I took the keys, but I didn't hug her. Not yet. We both needed time. The legal process took months. My parents were removed as trustees. The properties were reviewed. The accounts were audited. And every transaction was examined. Some money was recovered. Some assets had to be sold. My parents were required to repay funds that had been improperly used. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It was accepting that my childhood memories were now connected to financial documents. Every family vacation, every Christmas, every conversation about money, I kept wondering what had been real. One afternoon, my mother called. She asked if I would meet her. I almost refused, but I agreed. We met at a small cafe. She looked older, tired. She said, I know you may never forgive me. I didn't answer. She continued. Your father and I convinced ourselves that Madison needed more help than you. I said, I know, but we also knew you would survive. I looked at her. That's what you always told yourselves. She cried. We were wrong. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt sadness, because there was no apology that could give me back the years I had spent believing I wasn't important. I told her, "I don't hate you." She looked at me, "But I don't trust you." She nodded, "I understand." That was the beginning of a new kind of relationship, not the old one, a more distant one, but an honest one. A year later, I stood in the same kitchen. Sunlight came through the window. The house was quiet, but I no longer looked at it the same way. I realized something. The house had never been the real prize. The real prize was finally knowing the truth. For years, I thought my family had chosen Madison over me. I thought I had lost because I wasn't the favorite daughter. But I was wrong. I hadn't lost. I had simply been kept in the dark. My grandfather had trusted me before I was old enough to understand what trust meant. And when the truth finally came out, his wishes protected me. I eventually renovated the house. I turned one room into an office. Another became a guest room. And I kept the kitchen exactly the way it was. Because every time I stood beside that window, I remembered the woman I had been before the lawyer's phone call. A woman who believed family meant accepting anything just to keep the peace. I wasn't that woman anymore. As for Madison, we slowly rebuilt our relationship, not because we were sisters, but because we finally learned how to be honest with each other. My parents remained in my life too, but with boundaries, real boundaries. And whenever someone asked me whether I regretted buying that house, I always gave the same answer. No, because if I hadn't bought that house, the truth might never have been discovered. I thought my parents were giving my dream house to my sister. I thought that was the betrayal. But the real betrayal had been hidden for decades. And the biggest shock wasn't that my sister was going to receive my house. It was that the house had been connected to my inheritance all along. Sometimes, the thing we think we're losing is actually the thing that leads us to the truth. And sometimes, the family secret that breaks your heart is the same secret that finally gives you your life back. Asterisk asterisk, my name is Emily Carter. And that was the day I stopped being the daughter who always survived and finally became the woman who chose herself. Asterisk asterisk. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more emotional family stories, shocking secrets, and powerful endings. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't arrive when you want it. It arrives exactly when you need it.